briefly, Puzder. The bottom line with the Puzder, the CEO of Carl's Jr.'s, is that here's a guy who he's sort of the Scott Pruitt to EPA in some ways, right? Like his experience with the Department of Labor was a function of being fined and on the wrong end of the Department of Labor, and he was put in charge of it. But ultimately, he was sunk. Why? By the Republicans. Because we should remind people, if the Republicans don't want somebody sunk, they're not sunk.
Right. I mean, that's clearly the case, because it's the environment in the Senate now is you only need 50 votes. So Betsy DeVos can get through even with full opposition from Democrats because not enough Republicans turned on her nomination. So really the only way that someone like an Andy Puzder, which sounds like a name bullies give someone, like, hey, Puzder.
Right.
But anyway, the only way he could get stopped is if there was, Republican resistance. And two things sort of came together for that. Number one was this pre-existing issue of Puzder not having enough fealty to the anti-immigrant right. I mean, the first thing I saw about this guy was an article in Breitbart by Julia Hahn, who now works in the White House under Bannon, just attacking Puzder for his pro-immigration views. Now, Puzder isn't, he's just sort of your basic exploitative businessman who wants to use cheap labor, and that used to be a big part of the Republican coalition. But now you're not allowed to do that because it might help brown people in some way. So he has, been written out of the coalition, and it did come out today, in fact, that Bannon and Stephen Miller had it in for this guy, that he didn't have any real institutional support in the White House, and that became a problem when this other thing came out about domestic abuse and the tape from the Oprah Winfrey Show of his ex-wife years after the marriage dissolved, speaking in disguise about her situation with domestic abuse and Puzder vowing revenge on her if she ever spoke out. Because that was bad enough in and of itself, but because Puzder didn't have any friends in the base and in the upper echelons of the White House because of his immigration stances, that was enough to take him out, whereas it might not have been if he was lined up with the base on that particular.
Of course. I mean, he would be like, the fifth guy in the administration to have had a record of beating his wife. Right? I mean, let's be honest, folks. Like, that's not a disqualifier. The president himself is in. There's depositions out there about how he beat one of his wives. I mean, so it just so happens, though, that he was wrong on immigration. So he's gone. So what have you heard any names that are out there? I mean, from my perspective,
the president actually announced it probably as we were on the phone here.
Oh, geez.
It's a guy named Alexander Acosta. He's going to be the nominee. He worked in the National Labor Relations Board under Bush. And that maybe is all I need to say.
Right.
He was also a U.S. attorney from Florida, and has had a couple other jobs in government.
So this is, in some respects, the worst case
and
scenario.
He's Hispanic, so that fills that box.
Well, and this is one of the worst case scenarios because he's a guy who's going to know what to do. Right.
Exactly. He's going to be a well-informed deviant in the system rather than just a random deviant in the system who doesn't know how to get anything done.
Right. I mean, the best thing that you could say about Betsy DeVos or a Dr. Ben Carson is that at least you've got 6 months before they even figure out how to turn on their computer at work, and then they'll start to wreak havoc on everything. But this guy's going to start the ground running with rolling back all sorts of national labor relations board stuff, and
Yeah.
I mean the assault is just
I mean,
going to be amazing.
the good news is that it's going to take longer for him to just get into office.
Right.
You know? I mean, the dragging out of the Puzder fight has meant that there is no leadership atop the Labor Department that there would be if he was in. So the longer that takes, the better it is for safeguarding some of the rules and regulations that they oversee.
And the funny thing is, it seemed like Puzder was going to get out weeks ago, but they kept him in so that they can maintain this image of, it seems to me, of an administration that is making a great transition. And then they lost their national security advisor.
Well, really, kind of the hidden driver of this whole thing was DeVos, because the Senate committee that oversaw the DeVos nomination let her go without finishing her financial disclosure forms and everything. So they let the hearing happen first. And that caused this huge outcry from Senate Democrats, and of course the hearing went really badly. So Lamar Alexander, the chair of that committee, the HELP committee, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, said, well, we're not going to do that with Puzder. He's going to have to fill out his forms. And that's why there were 4 delays in Puzder's nomination hearing, because he couldn't get the forms done. And all that time allowed all of this opposition research to come out on Puzder, including the Oprah thing, which really sunk him. So DeVos was kind of a hidden driver in this whole thing.
Because the Oprah thing just gave people an excuse, essentially.
I mean, it was essentially that something is going to come up on all these guys because they essentially weren't vetted prior to being nominated. And when something comes up, either you have institutional support or you don't. And the problem for Puzder is he didn't.
Right, okay.
And so it's really the interplay between the Oprah thing and the long-standing lack of support because of the immigration